This is an interview that I want every therapist to watch. In this interview, I'm talking with Laura Casey-Foss about burnout, a topic that a lot of times we therapists tend to avoid, and we should not avoid that. So, this is a very open, candid discussion about burnout for therapists, what leads to burnout, and more importantly, what we can do about burnout. So, check out this interview with Laura Casey-Foss. Laura Casey-Foss, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Laura, so you're a registered psychologist and a certified EMDR therapist. Your background is in early development work with focus on attachment and developmental disorders. Most of your work these days is with first responders and other helpers like frontline social workers, and your therapy support dog Zulu works as an integral part of your practice. And outside of the therapy office, you're a yogi, chicken keeper, gardener, and a powerlifter.
Yes.
Yeah, so Laura, I wanted to talk to you and thank you for coming today to talk to me about the article that you wrote recently named How Therapist Burnout Takes a Toll on Our Mental Health System. And first of all, I want to thank you personally because this article inspired me to make some changes in my personally in my work and create more balance. But the other thing is that when I shared it with colleagues, the response was almost identical. Everybody said, or almost everybody said, I feel like it was written for me.
It was.
Yeah, it really was. And I want to read a short quote from the article that you wrote. In the beginning, you said, "It's not easy to talk about this. I told a friend recently that I really worry that my friends will think negatively of their own therapist if they hear that I've had a hard week." So, well, I'm wondering what inspired you to get to that point that you shared what a lot of us feel, but you went out there, you wrote this article.
Mm-hmm. I have a really good support system of other therapists, psychologists, social workers that I speak to fairly regularly. Mm-hmm. And I had come home on a Friday. I had said no all week long. I had, done EMDR session after EMDR session. I was exhausted, and more so by the act of having to say no and kind of absorbing the energy of so many people who were unable to get help at that point. Yeah. So when I spoke with my girlfriend that evening, I just said, like, how are we doing this every single week? And I had expressed to her a number of the things that are in the article. And she said, Lori, you have to write this. Like, all of us are feeling this way. You have to write this. And the public needs to know that this is something that's happening right now. So that's where it happened. That's where it came from.
Yeah. So what is it, Laura? What is it about us therapists that it's so hard for us to say no?
Well, there's a book, I think, we've chatted a little bit about this. There's a book called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And they describe this concept of human beings versus human givers. Mm-hmm. And human givers, generally women, but in this context, I'm going to say all therapists because, I think therapists in general are primed to be human givers as well.
Yeah.
We, I think, are raised to and shaped and trained to say, yes, I can help you.
Right.
You know, we're given all of these skills, and then I think it's in our nature to it's in our nature, but it's also something that we've been told this is expected of you, to give this knowledge back, to give this ability to help back. Right. And so I think we become these human givers where we're not absorbing a whole hell of a lot for ourselves, but we're still giving. So we're draining that cup, we're emptying our bucket constantly, and there's not a lot going back in it unless we're really careful about that.
Right. So what happens when we say no?
Anxiety sets in. Right. That's what happens for me. You know, it's this kind of, it's an kind of a feeling, right? It's this anxiety of, I can help this person, but I'm telling them I won't help them.
Right.
There's an expectation on me that I help people because I can. Technically, I have the skills to be able to do so. So, you know, not living up to the expectations of society, our profession, other people, that's really hard. And that's where the anxiety, I think, stems from.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the book, and you recommended the book, and I went over it before, you know, our meeting today. And one of the things that they talk about is emotions like as our tunnels. So if you go all the way through them, you get to the light at the end. But for a lot of times, what leads to burnout is that you're stuck in this tunnel. And it kind of reminded me what we tell our EMDR clients, right? That you're in a tunnel when you're processing, and we have to get to the end. So what is this endless tunnel that we have, like we meaning we therapists, that we are, you know, we're not getting to that end of the tunnel where the light is?
Mm-hmm. I suspect that it's the piece that we're not filling our own bucket, right? So we're trying to help all of these other people. We're working with other people constantly to help them develop better coping strategies, better coping skills, better support systems, all of that. But at the end of the day, if we've given so much of that and we're not working on that for ourselves, then we're never really coming out of that tunnel, especially when you layer on having to say no on top of that, which creates a different kind of emotion. There's not the same feeling of productivity and success when somebody makes gains or processes really positively. That just kind of gets stuck down. So if we're not exercising our own boundaries, then we're getting stuck in the middle of that tunnel, right? So it's kind of the only way out is through. We have to experience that. And I think we have to also really look at, what does it say about us if we say no? And then really challenge those core beliefs that come up from that.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. And, you know, so on one hand, it feels bad to say no, again, because we're human givers as therapists. But what happens is that when we never say no and we say yes to everything, we're just, our ability to help our clients that we already are serving or working with becomes limited.
Yeah, absolutely. We only have so much to give, right? You know, I working with first responders, the big analogy is that bucket, right? So over the course of their career, there are fatalities, there are things that happen over the course of their career that in the moment, sure, it feels like they're doing okay with it. They go home the next day, you know, another year later, something else happens, but it's all filling the bucket. And at a certain point, your bucket is full, and then it starts trickling over the sides. And our profession is really not much different from that. So if we're not finding a way to process all of the things that we go through, and that includes vicarious trauma, that includes saying no, that includes the expectations that are on us, all of that.
Yeah.
If we're not finding a way to process through all of that stuff, our bucket's going to get full at some point. We're going to experience that burnout.
Yeah. And in the article, you say that it's not about your coping skills, because you do have good coping skills, and it's not about, you're not taking care of yourself because, you, as they say in Burnout, you do yoga and you drink green smoothies. But
You do.
but there's some other things we need to put the boundaries. I'm wondering if you can share some of the boundaries that you created that are helpful for you to keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to put this in context, I began working with the public system 10 or so years ago, when I moved home to Newfoundland after having lived away. And I knew when I started there that my days there were limited. It was very, very challenging. It was a constant message of do more with less.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the shame applied that, well, if you can't do more with less, then there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I developed clinical burnout. I was really ill for a span of time, took some time off, and really started to plan my exit strategy. And that involved really learning how to put very clear boundaries in place, what I was willing to give and what I wasn't willing to give. So now I've gotten to a place where I'm in private practice. I work for myself in my own office, and I'm in charge of how much I give every day. So that involves a message on my voicemail that says, I'm not accepting new clients at this time.
Yeah.
It includes, I only see 5 to 6 people a day. 6 is my absolute max, and that's a rarity. I'm generally finished my day with clients at 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives me enough time to do my charting, return any phone calls, and wind down before I even leave the office. What else do I do? I pay myself first. Mm-hmm. So in the financial world, there's this concept of paying yourself first.
Yes.
When you get paid, you put it into savings. You put a certain amount into savings. I really enjoy the concept of paying myself first when it comes to self-care. So mm-hmm. if I know that I have a really busy week in place or a busy day, I make sure to do things to get downtime, to get to the gym, to mm-hmm. prepare meals ahead of time, all of those things so that I'm giving to me before I have to give to everybody else. Mm-hmm. So that I'm not on a Friday going, oh my God, I'm so tired. I don't have it in me to give anything to me at the end of it all.
Yeah.
So that's another big piece.
Yeah. I find it very inspiring. And I hope that as many therapists will, watch this interview and, think about really making this change, because I just know personally of so many people who are stuck in either the public system or even in public practice and seeing, 40 or close to 40 clients a week. And that I can see how this kind of routine will not eventually lead to burnout. It one way or another, it has to lead to burnout, whether if you yourself feel burnt out or you really stop listening to what your clients are saying, or you're just being less effective as a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's a sustainable model. And I think, what we're experiencing here in Newfoundland is that a lot of psychologists, I can only speak for the psychologists rather than social worker or other, but But what we're experiencing here is that a lot of psychologists are leaving the public system
Mm-hmm.
because there's very little room for them to put those boundaries in place. They can put boundaries in place outside of their work hours, but during the work day, it's hard for them to do that. And then, changes to requirements and expectations and all of that stuff has been a challenge. But, you said it was really inspiring. I have to really clarify that I'm not exempt from this. I'm not exempt from burnout. I'm not exempt. I haven't overcome this
Mm-hmm.
concept of human giver syndrome. It's very much a work in progress, and I think it always will be
Mm-hmm.
for any human giver.
Yeah.
Right. So it's this analogy that, I'm human giver syndrome is this escalator, and I'm walking, trying to get down the escalator, and the escalator keeps taking me back up.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to actively continue to check in on myself and I do that regularly. I have to see my own therapist. I have to do all of these things to keep myself from getting swept away
Mm-hmm.
by back up the escalator by human giver syndrome. So I love that it's inspiring. And I also want to say I'm right there with you.
Yes, it's always work in progress, and the boundaries. You have to maintain the boundaries, right? You said that you leave a voicemail on your work phone that you don't take new patients, which you mentioned in the article.
Mm-hmm.
But still, you got 6 people leaving you messages asking to see you. So I agree.
Or I've accidentally answered the phone.
Yeah. So I agree that it has to be work in progress because we have the human giver syndrome, and we have the tendency to want to please or help or be available for other people suffering. It's a work that we have to do on ourselves all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about really briefly, and that's how we're being exposed to screens. How before the pandemic started, we therapists were some of the only people whose work didn't require sitting all day in front of a screen. And now we're stuck in front of a screen, and I think that I believe that this leads to burnout too, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that there's a different piece of the brain that needs to be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with any therapy, attunement is intensely important. But with EMDR, I think there's a different level of attunement that's required.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes catch myself noticing the pulse of my client's pulse inside of their neck. It's very, very minute. So when we're on a screen, it's really hard to pick up on those signals. Yeah. So I think we're trying to gain the same rapport, the same level of attunement, the same connection through a computer screen that we would normally be able to get in person. So there's a different level, I think, of exhaustion that comes at the end of a day of working this way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Laura, I want to ask you one more question that kind of is my own personal interest, and it's more about EMDR. So you are a certified EMDR therapist, and I want to ask, how do we get better? How do EMDR therapists get better at what they do?
One of the things, so I did a training with E.C. Hurley last year, actually, just a few weeks before lockdown happened. Thank goodness I was able to get to Mississauga to do that training, because it was really, really great. But one of the things that he had said was to not be so afraid of the EMDR process. So as new therapists, myself included in this, I think we're very reluctant to leave the standard protocol. I think we're also we're really trained and taught to get them regulated first before we do the processing. So what he had said was regulation comes with processing, right? Mm-hmm. So understand whether or not they're within that window of tolerance, but they can be dysregulated and still be relatively within the right window of tolerance. Yes. So learning how to recognize that was really key. The other piece was understanding that EMDR is fairly forgiving. Mm-hmm. Right. So we can, and you said this earlier when we were chatting, that, there's the art and science of EMDR. And when we first start out, or when we are doing a new training or a new protocol, for example, I think we're really caught up in the science piece, right? And that's great. We're also really new at that point, right? But the art of EMDR is trying something out, following your client's lead. Yeah. So if I'm trying to clear affective circuits, which is a different technique with a client, and I've done this recently, it changed the entire procedure because I had to follow my client's lead. But it led to some really incredible processing that I don't think ever would have happened if I had stuck with the actual standard, that script.
Right. Yeah.
So taking some chances, I think, and recognizing that you're not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt, right? As long as we are understanding where our client is, that they're attuned, and that they're here in the room with us. I think those are kind of your standards for knowing you're still on the right track, but you can still take some risks within that, I think.
Thank you. That was really helpful. So Laura, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today about burnout. I think it's really, really important that the therapist, it's not just EMDR therapists, it's therapists in general will, read your article, which I'm going to link to below your article, and, Emily and Amelia's book, Burnout. And just, it's not just about reading, it's about taking the action. So I hope that this will inspire some of our, members of our community to take action. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much.
Of course.